Or what?
No,
I asked the question one more time because we have to move on.
On this question, in fairness to Jonathan, he took the right decision. And look, I'm not a fan of Jonathan. He suspended me from my job, okay? So okay? But you have to commend him, okay? President Jonathan took the advice and agreed to remove subsidy. As a government, we all agreed to remove the subsidy, and we're determined to remove the subsidy. The only reason we stopped at 50%, like I said, was the threat to people's lives. Now, but to your question, why do Nigerian leaders not listen? What my experience, okay, with talking to many of the leaders is they listen to so many people and they decide that they're going to accept those that tell them what they want to hear. We have too many sycophants in government. Look, you need to say, when I got to, you sit in a meeting and the president is there and people are speaking and the first thing they say is, Mr. President, I would like to thank you for your leadership to this country. In fact, you know, God has blessed Nigeria by making us your leader. If you were not there, I don't know where we would be. By the time these people lay this foundation, it is their advice that the president takes. Okay? People like me who would say, Mr. President, there are some things that are wrong. When you leave, they say you are his enemy. Okay? So the problem is that when leaders allow themselves to be surrounded by praise singers and by sycophants, they never get good advice. So people like Atedo and myself are always enemies of state because people don't like hearing the bad news. There was nothing we didn't say to Buhari about printing money, about ways and means, about the exchange rate, about subsidy. But every time you spoke about the economy, it was seen as a personal attack against the president. And there are people around him who convinced him that this person is your enemy. That's why he's saying this.
Okay.
Okay. So we need to begin to ask as leaders, who do we surround ourselves with? And please, those who are ministers and those who speak to the president, it is not to your benefit to turn yourselves, you disgrace yourselves, you debase yourselves by turning yourselves into praise singers. This leads to misplaced expectations. There's a role for the central bank. There's a role for the Ministry of Finance. You've got monetary policy, you have fiscal policy, you have structural policies, you have institutional reforms. And yes, I was one of those who commended the appointment of Wale John and Yemi Cardoso. These are two gentlemen that I've known for many years, and I have never had any question about their competence. And if you try to assess them, you've got to ask, what were they supposed to achieve? Okay. Now, going back to the beginning, you talked about 2012. And you talk about the suffering from removal of subsidy. It's simple arithmetic. If you're paying 80 naira or 65 naira per liter and you begin to pay 160 naira per liter, costs will go up. There will be hardship. And the duty of leaders is to understand that there will be a cost to removing subsidy. And I said in 2012, if you remember from the town hall meeting, to say that there will be hardship is not an economic argument. To say that there will be a cost to removing subsidy is not an economic argument. The economic argument is, this is the cost of removing the subsidy. What is the cost of not removing the subsidy? Are you making a choice? We were in a situation where we had a hedge that we called, it was not a subsidy, it was a hedge. You see, a subsidy by definition, the government says, I will pay X% of the price. That is a subsidy. I'll pay 20% of the price, whatever it is. Price goes up, you pay more, I pay more. Price goes down, you pay less, I pay less. What we had in this country is what in risk management you call a naked hedge, the worst possible derivative you can have. The government said to Nigerians, 200 million Nigerians, you will not pay more than X amount per liter on petrol, no matter what the price of petrol is. So oil price goes up from $40 to $140, the federal government pays the difference. Exchange rate moves from 155 to 300, the government pays the difference. Interest rates move from 5% to 15%, the government pays it. Remember, the price of petrol and what the calculations include the costs of crude, the cost of refined product, the cost of transportation, even interest rates, demurrage. If you look at the template, all of those amounts were being absorbed. The federal government was saying, I have an unlimited pocket. So we moved from a point where we were using revenues to pay subsidy to where we had to borrow money to pay subsidy to where we had to borrow money to pay interest on the borrowed money. We had become bankrupt. Anyone who takes a naked hedge ends up being bankrupted, especially with a commodity where you don't control the price. So this was the point in 2012. Now, if Nigerians had allowed the Jonathan government to remove the subsidy in 2011, there would have been pain. But that pain would have been a very, very tiny fraction of what we are facing today. This is the cost of delay. At that time, we worked out the numbers in the central bank, and I stood up and put my credibility on the line and said, remove the subsidy today, inflation moves up from 11% to 13%. I will bring it down in a year. We will not have had 30-something% inflation. Okay? That was where we were. Now, people like my friend Kaide Fayemi here and his APC friends had Occupy Nigeria, came out on the streets, told us we could not do it. And I remember calling one of my friends. And this is, we should talk about these things because it's important. There's a kind of poetic justice. That it is actually the people who led the Occupy Nigeria movement who ended up seeing the problem, inheriting the problem, and having to do it. And I remember calling one of my friends at that time and said, look, one of my closest friends, said, you know that what we're doing is right. He said, yes, I know. I said, why? He said, well, I'm in opposition. My job is to make the government look bad. You know, you are the governor of central bank, you go and defend your government. Just politics. And you know, the only reason the government compromised at that time, maybe